Rev up your engines!
Duke Hogan says, in the market for the first time in years, I want a 4x4. The prices are through the roof. It's nuts. I could buy acreage for the same price as a used 4x4. Yeah, here in Tennessee, you certainly could. The acreage, you can get some pretty cheap acreage out in the country. When something becomes popular, a short time ago, well, short in terms of his history, 10, 15 years ago, when SUVs got real popular, the prices just kept going up and up and up. So the point, when you're buying a used one, you could get a used nice sedan like a Camry or a Honda Accord for 1/3 the price of a used SUV, because everybody's nuts about the SUVs. And when they go nuts for the 4x4s, the same thing. The prices go sky high. And if you're talking about new one, they've gone bananas with the prices. I've seen some of them that were $80,000, and that's just getting to be astronomically ridiculous. I agree entirely. Richard Ortiz says, Scotty, huge fan of it. An 11 Ford Edge. My wife is a 2011 Ford Focus. What do you think about them? Both hit 100K, but the Edge has active traction control. Keep coming up. Well, that's a stupid traction control stuff. It doesn't work all that well anyways. I wouldn't even worry about it. I wouldn't waste money fixing that. They're not such great systems anyways. The Ford Edge is much better than the Ford Focus. The Focus is the cheapest made vehicle they make, just about. And they have problems as they age. But you've got it. You got 100K. Keep changing the oil. Take care of it. Who knows how long it'll last. The Edge is actually a much better made vehicle than the Focus is. Costs a lot more, and it's better made too. The Focus is generally 140 or so. They've fallen apart. I've seen Edges with 250 and they're still going okay. Ferris Canoe says, thoughts on the Mitsubishi Pajero 2015 3.4 liter. Now, over time, I'm not a Mitsubishi fan because they're cheaper made cars. There's no ifs, ands, or buts. Almost every single one I've ever seen, as it aged, they burnt oil. Because I don't know what it is with Mitsubishi, but they use crappy piston rings. So the piston rings wear out and they burn oil. I had one over here the other day, a 3.5. And I said, does it burn oil? He says, yeah. It burns a quart of oil every 400 miles. And I said, well, yeah, that's pretty typical for those. I have seen older Mitsubishis burn a quart of oil every 50 miles. Now, if you buy a brand new one, they can be decent vehicles for quite some time. I had people buy those and they love them when they bought them new. And then when I got to 130, 40,000 miles, they started falling apart and then they didn't love them anymore. But you can get them used pretty cheap because they burn oil. And if you get a cheap one used for a couple of grand, it lasts you 2, 3, 4 years, hey, you're making out like a bandit. Because if you buy a new car, it's going to cost you like 3 to 4 grand a year overall cost. Hannah Mayer says, can you bleed the brakes on a car with ABS brakes? The really old ones weren't that hard because they only had rear anti-lock brakes in the back, but they all are 4-wheel now. If you do not have air in your brake system, you can, because all you're going to be doing is having somebody step on the brake pedal, you open the bleeder valve, let some fluid, tighten it up, then they pick up the fluid, and that way you won't introduce any air into the system and you can bleed them. But on the other hand, let's say you had to replace the brake ABS modulator, so it's all full of air, the new one. No, you can't bleed it without a fancy scan tool like I as a professional mechanic have. The ABS module has air in it because you're replacing it. It goes through this insane state when I put my machine in. It tells me, do this, now do this, now do this, and you hear noises, now do this, and then say, repeat that 6 times, then do this. And it can take an hour and a half with a scan tool to bleed the air out of them. But if you have not introduced air into the system, you can bleed it like any other car. 10 tabs open says, Scotty, my dad just bought a 1998 Chevy S10 truck for $750 for 198 miles. Are they any good? He only paid $750. And it's a 98. Back in 1998, Chevrolet made a lot better trucks than they make today. I've seen people get 98, 99s, 2000s, and they were still in decent shape. Odds are that S10 has a V6 engine. That's the weakest engine GM made for those trucks. The engine might be worn out. If it's a V6 engine, my advice would have your father, if he doesn't know how to do it, pay a mechanic to do a wet and dry compression test of the engine. He'll know what shape the engine is. If all the cylinders are good, great. But if they've got low compression or some do and some don't, the engine's worn out and he didn't get ripped off. He only paid $750 and if it runs, he can continue to drive it, but eventually he'd have to rebuild the engine or replace it. JLM says, I got an 08 Rubicon, loose steering, new drag link and track bar and ball joints. Is it a steering gear? Well, it could be. There's a zillion things that can go wrong on a vehicle. All you got to do is have someone sit in a vehicle with the engine running, have them turn the steering wheel back and forth. You sit there and watch the wheel. And if you don't see any of the drag link or the wheel moving while it goes like that, it's the rack because it's not turning. It's the gears worn because he's turning it and the gear's so worn it goes like that and the wheels and the drag links and everything aren't even moving. You know It's the gear inside the steering box that's worn out. And I wouldn't doubt it. It's kind of typical. The Jeeps are kind of poorly made, and that thing is, 13 years old, so it wouldn't surprise me at all that it's worn out. Ken Morgan says, Scotty, is putting an oil catch can in my Honda GDI engine a worthwhile thing to do? Personally, I wouldn't bother with a Honda because they do not have carbon buildup problems. I've never seen a Honda GDI engine myself that had a carbon buildup problem on the intake valves. Now, I see it all the time with Volkswagens up the wazoo. Sometimes it's this thick and you got to blast them out with walnut shells and a sand blaster. Instead of using sand, you use walnut shells because they're not as abrasive as sand. But, no big deal on a Honda because they really don't have that problem. I don't see that in Hondas. They're better designed than the Volkswagens. There's just no arguing it. I wouldn't waste my time putting one on a Honda, but I definitely would on a Volkswagen. Ewan says, my 2010 Prius occasionally completely zaps its own electronics. I shut it off, it's dead until I wiggle the negative battery cable. Any ideas? Yeah, tighten the negative battery cable. First take it off, then clean it. They make those battery terminal cleaners like AutoZone for $2 or whatever, and they got the metal wire brushes. You clean it all, then you clean the terminal and put it back on and tighten it up. Now, if you tighten it up and it still wiggles, that means you need a new terminal. You can splice in a new terminal then. If you're wiggling and it works, obviously you have a bad connection there. Take it off, clean it, then tighten it on. Should fix your problem. Willie Smith says, Scotty, what does it mean when the green flashing key light on a Honda Odyssey 08 won't start sometimes and won't lock? It has 280,000 miles. I use it for work. When the green light flashes like the key, that means your anti-theft system has activated itself and it thinks somebody's trying to steal the car. If you have another known good key, try that. It could be that key's wearing out or the batteries in your key fob wearing out. If that's the case, go to a drugstore or something, buy the hearing aid watch batteries, the ones that fit in your key system. They use the same type of batteries, and that should fix it. Now, if it doesn't, that means that something's wrong with your anti-theft system. You're going to have to see a mechanic like me because we have fancy scan tools that scan it, get the codes for what's wrong with that anti-theft system, and then you have to fix it. Now, sometimes, very occasionally, but do have your battery load tested, because if your battery is weak, the main battery of the car, it can set the alarm system off and the anti-theft system. So have your battery load tested. Any mechanic, any auto parts store will do it free. And if they say your battery's bad, replace that. And that can fix it too, because a weak battery can make that alarm system go on. Quill33 says, Scotty, I have an '08 Impala with the stupid active fuel management. Is it a good idea to drive it in third gear so it stays in 6-cylinder mode? Well, you can, but you can also buy these kits that delete that system so it never comes back on again. I'd do that if I were you, because then it would be better. Then you could go into fourth gear and you get better gas mileage. Those delete systems aren't that hard, and if you don't feel safe, find a mechanic like me that can install the system for you, and then you can turn the stupid active fuel management system off. It's a very bad system. When they go from 6 to lower, they don't have enough power. They're just garbage. It's a half-assed way to try to save gas mileage. So you could get it deleted if you want, pay a mechanic, or keep it in third gear. Jeff Nessett, I got an '06 Lexus ES330. The passenger side airbag looked like it's going to erupt from my dash. Is there a recall on it? Thanks. If you're ever curious, just go to the National Highway Traffic Safety Association websites. I think it's NHTSA.org, something like that. Type in your VIN number and they'll tell you if there's any recalls. Some of the Takata airbags are recalled for not being built right, but they don't look weird. They just don't operate correctly, and if they go off, the metal might make shrapnel and hit your head. That you'd want to check anyways, but cosmetic stuff, I don't see any recalls on, but you never know. It might be under the Takata airbag recall, and then they'll have to replace it free. Rudy Getz says, I've always just compressed the brake caliper after leaving the brake fluid cap open when I do a brake job and never damaged the master cylinder. But how do you open the bleeder valve without letting air into the system when you squeeze it in? It's very easy. All you have to do, if you do it, start with one person. You can get rubber tube that fits on the bleeder valve, put it into a glass full of brake fluid, right? Then have someone step on the brake while you open it. That will push the fluid into the container that already has fluid in it. Then there won't be any air in the line. Then before you tell them to pick up the brake, you tighten the bleeder valve. Then when they pick it up, it's not going to pick up anything anyway. Even if you were doing it without a tube, you just can sit there with a pan under there to collect the fluid, tell the person, wait a second, let me open it, you open it. Then when they step on it, the fluid comes out. And you tell them, keep your foot on, and when the fluid stops coming out, you tighten it. And then no air will be sucked up in anyways. It's not that hard to keep the air out. Just make sure that the guy doesn't pick his foot up when you have it open, or it will suck air. in. McCowan Sam says, I'm looking for a good car for myself. Is a used Volvo S80R at 188,000 miles for $3K a good deal? Those are fun cars to drive. They're solid built cars. But if you're in the United States, those are European cars. Cost a lot of money to fix. You're gambling buying one with 188,000 miles. But then again, $3,000, the original one cost a fortune compared to that. If you can find a guy like me who understands Volvos, who's a good mechanic, who'll check it out for you and say that, yes, it's actually in pretty decent shape, I'd offer him $2,000 and see if you could meet in the middle. But you want it checked out first, because if the engine or transmission's going on that, you could spend $5,000 to $8,000 fixing them, and it's not worth doing on an old Volvo like that. So if you never want to miss another one of my new car repair videos, remember to ring that bell.